Welcome back to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering those real, actionable insights you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees, and this is my equally talented co host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. Dr. Ryman, you want to tell them why we're here, why we show up every week, and why we bring answers to questions in 15 minutes or less?
Absolutely. So it can be really difficult to find good information about cannabis on the internet. I mean, for one thing, a lot of cannabis information isn't even allowed to be on the internet and is censored on social media platforms. But even if you go to Google and try to find some information, you may put in a question and get 100 different responses. And many of those responses are even going to contradict each other and give you completely opposing amounts of information. So we are here to cut through all of that. We know that you're busy. We know that you don't have all day to spend researching this. So we are here to answer your cannabis questions with science-backed information in 15 minutes or less so that you can get the information you need and go ahead with your day. You might consider us your really cool aunties or your kick-ass granddaughters, the women in your life who will always tell you the truth.
And we will. And that's what we like to do is we like to tell the truth on this show. And like Amanda said, just cut to the chase. What is the real answer? So today we're going to dive into a topic that's heavy on the heart, but light on the stigma. Can cannabis treat depression? It's a question that's sparking curiosity and conversations alike. In this episode, we're exploring whether this plant could be a source of solace for those navigating the stormy seas of mental health. So grab your favorite herbal tea or herbal remedy, and let's shed some light on this complex and important question. So for some, the holidays are an uplifting time filled with family, events, and cheer. But for others, even the jingliest of bells and the starriest of nights do not lift the experience of depression. So depression is common during the holiday time for many reasons, including feelings of isolation, social overwhelm, and disconnection. For some, cannabis has been a beneficial route for dealing with depression, and for others, the plant can make things worse. So let's get into it. Dr. Ryman, can cannabis actually treat depression?
Well, you really hit the nail on the head, Christina. For some, cannabis can lift depressive symptoms. For others, it might leave them feeling worse. And one of the reasons is that depression is not necessarily tied to one root cause. So some people feel depressed because of just the way their brain releases and reacts to certain chemicals like serotonin. Other people feel depressed as a result of their environment or something that has happened in their lives. So when you think about like pain, right? So some pain is caused by faulty signaling in the brain. We call that neuropathic pain. So your brain is basically sending a signal of pain. And some people feel pain because they bang their arm or they hurt their ankle, right? And we call that localized pain. So depression isn't that different. We have clinical depression, which is really more about the way your brain is reacting. And then we have what we might call acute depression or situational depression, which means that something happened in your life or you're in an environment that is bringing on depressive symptoms. So different kinds of depression, just like different kinds of pain, may require different kinds of treatment. And some treatments may target the chemicals in the brain, and some may focus on the symptoms of depression. And while cannabis is useful for some people, as we've mentioned on this show, it really does go back to the product that you're using, the dose that you're using, and your set and setting.
Absolutely agree. But let's start with the benefits of using cannabis for depression.
Well, for one, as many cannabis consumers can attest to, cannabis does improve short term mood, right? So, when targeting the symptoms of depression, things like low mood, anxiety, or insomnia, some people report that cannabis helps, right? So, depression is this umbrella term that really refers to a cluster of symptoms. And a lot of the symptoms related to depression, like the ones that I just mentioned, are regulated by the endocannabinoid system. So the endocannabinoid system plays a role in regulating mood, in regulating sleep, in regulating appetite, and has a role for specific endocannabinoids that have impacts on these symptoms, right? So people who experience depression due to something like sleep issues or anxiety issues. CBN, for example, can help with sleep, and CBD can help with calming and being an anti-anxiety. And for folks who are dealing with a chemical imbalance in the brain, THC and CBD can influence neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, which are involved in mood regulation. So there's a lot of different ways that endocannabinoids, both the way that they function in the brain and relate to other chemicals in the brain, and the way that they impact the symptoms of depression, may be beneficial for people that are dealing with these symptoms. However, I want to mention, and we've talked about chemical and drug interactions on this show before, you should really take care when using cannabis while also using something like an SSRI or a medication that is also impacting the way that certain chemicals are being released in the brain. Just like high blood pressure medication and other types of medication, there could be a synergistic effect where cannabis actually enhances the effects of your SSRI. There could be a depressive effect where it inhibits the effects of the SSRI. So if you are on any other kind of mental health prescription drug, make sure you talk to your doctor before starting cannabis as a treatment.
For sure. We don't like when you self medicate. So, what you said about the differences in chemical related and situational depression are very interesting. For people who are already dealing with a chemical imbalance, can a situation like the holidays make their depression worse? And is cannabis a good or bad option for those folks?
So that's a really great question. So people who are already vulnerable to depression should pay close attention to triggers during the holidays that might make them feel worse, right? So if you're somebody that already gets depressed easily, it may be easier for things around the holidays to trigger depression in you. So this is something that you should just really be aware of and be mindful of. For this population, what we might call clinically depressed people who also experience depression symptoms or worsening symptoms during the holidays, cannabis may not be the best option. So in some cases, especially with heavy or frequent use, cannabis can exacerbate depression or anxiety, which we've talked about on this show before. High doses of THC in particular may lead to paranoia or increased anxiety. So those who are already using cannabis for depression should pay special attention to their consumption during the holidays and try to stay at their usual dose or frequency. So if you're somebody that uses cannabis for depression already, and let's say for you that consists of using 3 times a day, try to be mindful that during the holidays that doesn't increase to 6 times a day, that doesn't increase to 3 bowls instead of 1 bowl. So it may be that additional symptoms like sleep disturbance might require adding a CBN gummy in the evenings, but sticking to your usual regime as much as possible will help protect against any unintended effects.
And just curious, how far has the research gone in this area? Oh, it sounds like
Well,
your roofers arrived.
the roofers have arrived. The dogs are welcoming them. Luckily, Sean kind of anticipated their arrival and got outside before they rang the doorbell. So I think we escaped a little unscathed from the roofer hoopla.
Perfect.
So the question about research is a good one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not very far. And this is because when it comes to using cannabis for mental health issues, research is fairly limited and really only consists of observational studies versus controlled trials. And this is because we still have a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to how cannabis and mental health impact each other. So there's a lot of ethical concerns about administering cannabis to someone with a mental health issue versus just observing behavior that is already happening. So we feel better about saying, all right, this is a person who's already using cannabis for depression. Let's ask them about how it's helping them. Let's ask them about their symptom management versus here is somebody who has depression. Let's give them cannabis and then see if their mental health gets better or worse. Because of the ethical concerns about making somebody worse, bringing on something like suicidal ideation, it is very difficult to do controlled studies of really any psychoactive drug that's not under FDA approval pathways for any mental health condition. Also, Schedule 1, that makes it very difficult to do research on actual people using the actual cannabis plant. The National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, even though they've technically lifted the monopoly on who can provide cannabis for a Schedule 1 approved study, there's still very, very few sources for obtaining cannabis to do this kind of research. other than the government's own supply. The ethical considerations with giving someone who is experiencing mental health issues cannabis and the restrictions related to cannabis being a Schedule 1 means that a lot of the research we have on this is survey research, which isn't terrible. I'm a survey researcher. There's a lot of value in survey research, but you can't really establish causation. You can really only establish relationships between two things.
So it sounds like no, we're not really prescribing or recommending cannabis for depression, using it to help with some offset of the symptoms from depression. Is that right?
Right, right. And so, most mental health conditions, even though there is a specific condition that you may be diagnosed as, whether that's anxiety or depression or insomnia or PTSD or bipolar disorder, these are all mental health conditions that are made up of a cluster of symptoms. And some of those symptoms may be helped by cannabis. Some of those symptoms may be made worse by cannabis. So, as I mentioned, when it comes to depression, one of the symptoms of depression can be feelings of like hopelessness, right? Like a low mood associated with being depressed. And that's what a lot of people think of when they think of depression. But depression is also lack of appetite, isolating yourself, insomnia, in some cases, anxiety, even though that kind of goes counterintuitive, can also be a symptom of depression. And so cannabis can definitely help with some of these symptoms, but you have to be careful because when you're treating a menu of symptoms, there are some things that can be helped and some things where cannabis may make it worse. And that's why we really say that knowing the product you're taking and the cannabinoids in that product and paying close attention to the dose and close attention to your set and setting is a way to make sure that you can use cannabis to help the symptoms. It can help, like perhaps sleep disturbance, but at the same time, not make symptoms like mood disturbance worse because you're using too much THC. Maybe you're using it in an environment where you're self isolating. And so that can make that particular symptom of depression worse instead of better.
And just like we mentioned on the show, it sounds like the same rules apply here where we say start low and go slow, make consumption intentional and mindful, and pay close attention to how much you are consuming. Choose a product and dose that gives you the outcome you're looking for with the smallest dose possible. And we like the microdose effect, the therapeutic effect with the microdose. And note your mindset and setting and how these things may impact your experience.
Absolutely. Mental health in a lot of ways is a lot harder to treat than physical pain. And, of course, there's very complicated pain cases where the treatment is very difficult. But mental health is so impacted by your mindset, your environment. It interacts with so many things that the more mindfulness you can bring into any mental health treatment and really pay attention to how you're feeling, how the intervention you're using is impacting you. And again, when it comes to cannabis, really try to go for that minimum effective dose. So the smallest amount you can take to still get the effect that you desire. And sometimes that's a microdose and sometimes it's not a microdose. Sometimes you may need, 20 milligrams of THC in order to get the effect you're looking for. And that may be the
Mhm.
smallest amount you can use and still get that effect. And for you, that may be a minimum effective dose. But if that's what it is for you, there's no need to go to 50, right? There's no need to go to 100. Just because you can't fatally overdose on THC doesn't mean you can't have a negative outcome. You can watch our episode on THC overdose for more on that.
Yeah. Well, we'll wrap up today's episode right here. Thanks for joining us as we explored cannabis and depression. Remember, understanding this plant's potential is a journey, not a sprint. So keep learning, keep asking, keep the conversations flowing, and keep tuning into us. So if you got thoughts, questions, personal insights, drop us a line at info@mypersonalplants.com. We always love hearing from you, our viewers and listeners. And don't forget to explore more of our YouTube garden for more plant-powered wisdom. Subscribe, like, and ring that bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep the dialogue